The following course is one video out of a series called Mastering Mountain Environments, which you can find on BlenderHD.com. It's also available on the Blender markets. So this video we're going to be covering how to create some really realistic pine trees, and it's the only video out of the course that will be released for free. I just thought it was so cool that I had to share with you all, so I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on BlenderHD.com. Alright, to make our cool looking trees inside of Blender, what we're going to do is use an add-on called Sapling. So let's go to File, User Preferences. Over in Add-ons we can search for Sapling, and if you don't have that checked, then you can check it right now and you'll be good to go. So let's delete this default cube here, and on the second layer, so we don't have any distractions, let's go Shift-A, Add Curve, and Add Tree. So now we have this tree curve here, and if you press T on the toolbar, down here we have our settings for the tree. I'm going to press Shift Space to get rid of everything else. And these are the settings for the tree. You can also find this by pressing F6 to bring up a panel. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is load a preset. So there are a couple different ones. One's for a oak tree, willow tree, different cool stuff. But I'm going to use Black Tupelo. I don't know how to pronounce that, but that's what it is. And this will give us a good starting point for our pine tree. You can see that right now we have the options for the geometry. We can bevel this if we want, but I'm going to leave that off just so that everything will go faster once we start adding more and more branches. We have controls for that. We have a handle type, which doesn't necessarily matter unless you're going to edit the curve afterwards. But what we want to change is this shape here. But you can see that it's grayed out. And the reason for that is because we need another level of branches for it to work. Because when we go to branch splitting and we add another level, you'll see that the branches move. It's like they're actually being weighed down by those branches. And so the shape of the whole tree is going to change a bit. So if we go back to geometry, we now have access to this shape option. And I'm going to change it from tapered cylindrical to conical, because we want our tree to be shaped like a cone. And another reason is that there's now going to be less branches up here and more down here. Whereas if we had it at tapered cylindrical, it's going to be a little bit top heavy and too dense at the top and too sparse at the bottom. So this is the first step right here. The second is to define our branches the way we want it to be. And depending on how fast your computer is, if we adjust these settings, it might take a little while. You can see it's not quite real time. So let's take this second level of branches and move that down to 10. So now we have only a few. So just to backtrack 1 second in case you haven't used this before, the levels here are being split off from each previous base. So we have the first level is just the trunk itself, and then the second level we have the main branches, then we have those secondary branches, and then we even have a fourth level. And each of these levels are controlled by all of these different settings. We have branches, split angles, down angles, and we also have other options for them in branch growth. And each one of these sections controls that setting for that level. So this is controlling level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So since I want to edit level 2, I'm going to use this second option down here. So we're not really splitting anything because we have the split set to 0, so we can skip all of this. But I want to edit the down angle. And what that does is changes the direction that it's emitted from the normal direction of the base. So it's not actually down as in, pointing down gravity-wise. It's actually down angle as compared to the normal. So in this case, it is directly down just because the branch is vertical, but as you can see, once we get to these secondary branches, if we change the down angle on those, it's not quite doing the same thing. We can go into top view by pressing 7 on the number pad and change this third level, and you can see that it's going in relation to the normal of the branch. So I'll leave that at about 30. That looks nice and good. And so I don't have to keep switching between all of these views. I'm going to press N and toggle quad view. That way I can see everything all at once. And this is really handy for editing our tree. And we can zoom in if we need to. Alright, so let's go ahead and edit this second set of branches, because right now they're curving up a bit too much. And since the branch curving has to do with how it grows, it makes sense that that will be under branch growth. So we can change this vertical attraction to be a little bit lower, say 0.25, and that way it won't grow up towards the sun quite as much. But we also have some settings down here. We can skip length because the length of these look pretty good, but just as a note, these are in proportion to the branch below them. So this means that secondary branches are going to be 30% the size of the trunk. So if I wanted to increase this, which it looks like I might want to make them a little bit longer, say 0.4, now they're 40% the size of the trunk, and then this is 60% the size of the original branches, and so on. But down under curvature, this is where the branches are curving from. A negative value is going to help them to curve up, and a positive value is going to have them curve down. So with these, let's give them a value of, say, 50. We also have a back curvature, which is going to curve the tip instead of the base of the branch. But if we change this, you'll notice that it jumps a little bit, and we have to actually go back and reset some of the things. So we want it to sort of droop down and then back up. So we want a positive value on the first one and a negative value on the second one. So we get that nice droop and curve effect. I'd say that's looking pretty good. It's like a nice fir tree. All right, let's go back to branch splitting, and now we can add our fourth level. So there we have it. Looks like we do need to change the down angle for that because I don't like how they're kind of sticking out willy-nilly there. So let's see, move that to about 25. I think that has more to do with the branch growth. Let's turn the curvature up. There we go, now they're not sticking up quite so much. And we have this nice pine branches. If you find that you need more of a curve and not a straight line, you can increase the resolutions here. Or you can also decrease them if you'd like to save on memory if you're going to be instancing these. But for now, this looks like a pretty good starting spot. Next, let's go ahead and get leaves for these guys. So let's go to leaves here and just click show leaves. I'll have these show up. But since they're going to be pine needles, a bunch of little pine needles, we don't really want hexagons because pine needles aren't really shaped like that, and we want to save as much geometry as possible, so let's go ahead and switch to rectangular. Now this is all well and good, except that they're all fat squares, and we want them to be very skinny. So you can see down here we have leaf scale and leaf scale X. Leaf scale is going to scale the entire leaf up and down, but for now 0.3 is good. And leaf scale X is going to scale it only in the X direction, which is fantastic because if we set this to 0.05, you can see that it is now 5% of the original width. And it looks quite good for a pine needle. So let's maybe zoom in here and see how many per branch we're getting. It looks like we might need a bit more. So let's say 15. Maybe some more. Let's go 20. Alright, our branches are looking good. If you'd like some more leaves on there, you can definitely go to branch splitting and increase the amount of branches here. So maybe go 15. Because they're only going to be produced on the very last level. So if you turn this down, you can see that they're going to be produced on the third level and not the fourth. Alright, so it looks like we might need a few more of these third level leaves, or branches, excuse me. It's just sort of tweaking it until you're happy. Let's go 30 with that, and then increase this to 20, and that should be nice and thick. Okay, that looks like a good looking pine branch. And if you want to preview how thick the leaves are, you can just switch to rendered view. And I think that looks great. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and add a few more branches on this level here. So we had 10, let's try 50. And this might take a second because it's not the fastest add-on ever. However, the results definitely make it worth the couple minute wait, or 30-second wait. Totally depends on how fast your computer is. Alright, that didn't take long at all. Okay, so we have this nice tree, and I think that's really all we need to do for now. Oh, actually, one more thing. Before we edit it, exit this, you might think that you don't have quite the right shape. Maybe you want that nice curve that you'd seen in some of other trees where it has a good slope going outwards. One of the trees included in this course has a nice slope like that. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to leaves and turn leaves off just so we can see this a bit faster. So it won't be quite so slow. And also under branch splitting, let's go down to 3. So this is completely optional. I'm going to go to pruning and turn on prune. And it's going to give us this arch here that's going to cut the tree. Now, the bad thing about pruning that I found is it gives us this big clump down here, and I really don't like it. But unfortunately, that's pretty much always going to be the case. So the options for prune here, we have a ratio. So if you want only 75% of tree limbs to be pruned, we can go 0.75. And you can see that some of them are peeking out a little bit more. We also have a prune width, so if you want the tree to be wider, you can say 0.5. But of course they're not sticking out yet too much. If you'd like them to, you can go to branch growth and just increase the length of this here. Let's go crazy, say 0.6. Alright, now back to pruning. You have a prune width peak. So this is where along this vertical axis this little turning point is for the high and the low powers. So since we want the tree to have a nice curve from the bottom, we're going to set this fairly low, say 0.1. So that's good, and now we just needed it to curve inwards. So we have a prune power high and a prune power low. And if you're familiar with math, you'll know what the power graphs look like. A value of, say, anything less than 1, so a fraction, 0.5 is going to have a curve, and the lower that curve is, the sharper it's going to turn. So if I wanted it to be 0.1, we're going to have a very sharp or squarish edge. But if I set this to say something higher than 1, like 2, we'll now have that nice inverse curve. Now we can also have this not end so abruptly if we don't really have any branches going down that far, but if we did, we could set this to a negative value, say negative 0.1, and it'll stick out like that. Of course, we could have it matched just by negative 0.2, and there we go. So that is completely optional. The one reason I don't always like this is because it takes time to clean up this clump of branches at the bottom. So I'm not going to use it. However, it's definitely a nice thing to do if you need to. So I'll just uncheck prune. Now we have our tree like we had before. I'll go back to branch splitting, increase that. But you'll notice that one thing that the pruning did do was give us a nice trunk. And right now we have our leaves going below the base of the trunk. So let's increase the base size to say 0.5. And that does look a little bit weird. So let's go 0.3. And we can always extend the trunk manually at the end. Alright, so that looks fine. I'm going to go ahead and add our leaves back. And now we have a good looking pine tree. So let's go ahead and shade this really quick. It's not too hard at all, so I'm going to untoggle the quad view, press Shift Space, or I guess Control Up does the same thing to go out of that full screen mode. And we can see if we go into rendered view what our tree looks like, at least the shape. To get a better view, I'm going to add a lamp. Let's see, add lamp, sun, rotate that a bit. Okay. Cool, so we have that. Now I'm going to drag this up, and this is going to become my node editor. And this is going to become my rendered view. And just so we have a nice backdrop, I'm going to change this to a sky texture. and turn the sun up to something a little bit better, say 3. Okay, so now we have our tree like we would expect. And right now it's only rendering the leaves because Cycles isn't rendering curves, but we can set that in a bit. So now we can just take these leaves, add a new material, and as you can see when we change this diffuse color, oh, maybe I'm not selecting the right thing. That is selecting the tree curves. Okay, let's add a new material for these leaves, call them, well, I guess I can call them needles. And now we can go into rendered view. Alright, there we go. So as I change this diffuse, our tree becomes green. But I found that actually diffuse isn't the best in this case. For whatever reason, I think velvet works a lot better. Maybe just because it's trying to simulate all of those little fuzzy things. I honestly am not quite sure why it looks better, but it just gives it a bit more volume. So let's press Shift S on this shader to go switch to shader velvet. There we go. So as you can see, it seems to give it a bit more volume. And it just looks a little bit better in my opinion. So we have that, and we can change this color to whatever we'd like. Let's make it a little bit darker. That looks good. Now we can zoom in so we can see the details. But of course, our trees are not going to be completely green like this. They're going to have a few different surface attributes. If you go and pick some pine needles and take a look at them, you'll notice two things. First, that they're a little bit shiny, and second, that light will pass through them. So as such, let's add a glossy and a translucent shader. So add shader, mix shader, put that in there. I'm going to duplicate that one more time. Then I'm going to Shift A, add shader glossy, plug that in the first one, add shader translucent, plug that into there, and I'm going to press Control Shift on this shader, so we're only viewing that one. You can see it, that's the only one that's plugged in. So we're only looking at the glossy right now. We can turn the glossy all the way up, see exactly what's happening, and we can set the roughness and the color. So I like to leave this almost white, maybe a little bit green, just so it's not quite so pure white. And of course set the roughness up somewhere around 0.4. That way it's not quite so shiny, but it still has those nice highlights where we need it. Now we can mix this with the original velvet. I think a value of 0.2 looks quite good. And we can now make this a little bit darker, since this is going to make it a bit lighter. So you can see without and with, it's definitely going to make it less saturated. Let's go maybe 0.4, just so at least we can see some of those highlights. And thus we can make this one a bit more saturated. Alright, now we can add this translucent. We can make this a darker green color. And so you can see the light is passing through completely. We're not getting any shading here, or any shadows, really, from one to the other. Technically we are, but the light is passing through, so it's almost like subsurface scattering, but a bit different and a whole lot faster. So let's set this down to something lower, like 0.1. That's looking good. And I'm sorry I keep changing my mind, but I'm going to change this back down to 0.2. Okay. So that is looking pretty good. We have our tree, but you might think that it looks a little sparse. We might need a few more branches here and there, but no worries, because I did that intentionally. We don't want so much geometry that it's overwhelming. And there's a way that we can use this to speed up our rendering by using these fewer branches instead of if we generated all of them right out of the gate from Sapling add-on. So the first thing we need to do is go into this curve here. We can go into edit mode, and I'm going to try to find that original base. It's the one that's directly at the center of the 3D view. I'm going to take that one, and I'm going to drag it down. That's going to be our trunk. So we have that, and it looks like I forgot to add the beveling. Well, no fear, we can definitely add that in later. I'm going to kill that for now. Go to this curve panel here, and we can actually use a bevel object. So what I'm going to do, well, you could actually use a bevel depth like that, but you're not going to get a full actual shape. What you're going to get is, oh, maybe you are. Maybe I was thinking of the extrude. I'm not sure. But okay, we can set this to 0.5. That still looks way too thin. Let's go 1. And there we have it. But of course we want that to be a bit thicker, so we can go into edit mode, take this and just press Alt S, and that'll scale it up. And now since there's actual geometry there, it will render. But of course we don't want that green material I accidentally made earlier, so let's change that to a darkish brown. Okay, so it's not looking too bad, but of course we need to add more branches. But first of all, I need to separate the trunk from the rest of the tree. So let's go back into edit mode, select this bottom part right here, and I'm going to press Control L. And what that's going to do is select all of the curve that's only attached to that, so that it's not selecting anything else. And I'm going to hit P, and that's going to separate it out, so I can use this as a different object. Alright, but now the cool part, I can take these needles and take the curve that are attached to them, go into top view, and I'm going to press Alt D. And what that's going to do is make an instance of this. I'm going to rotate it around a bunch, maybe scale it in, bring it down a bit. And so now we have an instance, not a complete copy, duplicate. So basically an instance is something that if you change one in edit mode, it'll change the other one, but it's also going to be a lot faster, or at least a bit faster in the viewport and in rendering, because it doesn't have to calculate all of that geometry twice. So we can have an extremely high number of polygons without taking too much memory. So that's super cool, and I can take this and I'm going to Alt D, duplicate that one more time, bring that around, maybe press Control M and X to mirror it so it's not all looking exactly the same. Maybe scale that one down even more. Bring it down on the Z-axis. And there we go. You can change it to your liking. But now when we go ahead and render this, you can see we have a nice realistic looking tree, and it's actually rendering quite fast. So that's how you make realistic pine trees inside of Blender. Remember that we do have 3 of these trees included in the project files, so you can use those however you'd like. 2 of them not actually use this instancing trick just because it doesn't look as good on those types of trees, but one of them definitely does, the one with the most needles, so it'll work out like that. So to all those who are here that are not actually taking the course, that are just here for the preview, thanks so much guys for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.